Lecture 5, everybody. The outline starts with entitlement. The word entitlement today here in the United States culture refers to, in general culture, it refers to something that you deserve. And often it's a critique of something you deserve that you didn't really earn. Now, this particular perspective comes from a state of mind and a culture, particularly at least with chapter 3, of folks who uh, came back from throwing the Muslims out, throwing Islam out of Spain, and coming back and saying, "Hey, I fought for you, and now I deserve this." Of course, in the to an extent, a nation who sends out people to fight come back and expect a degree of privileges to be given to them because they risked their life and limb on behalf of the nation. But what's interesting is what happens when you have children, and all of a sudden your children grow up with the mentality when they themselves didn't go and earn it, and hence I feel like, hey, my dad was X titled, I got some fancy title. What about me? So there's this mentality of entitlement of sorts, and this mentality at a collective level eventually arrives here are our American shores, particularly with the Spanish in this case. Yeah, the author is going to be focused primarily in Mexico through most of his book. Of course, Mexico, the culture of Mexico already informed you is expressed through the major Uto Azteca linguistic group across this huge region, Central America through Mexico, all the way to the north part of the Southwest, and even in some parts of California, Nevada, etc. So they have this cultural linguistic ties with each other. So there's a common interpretation of reality because of the language. Of course, cultural anthropology expounds that 70% of your reality is based on your language. And one example I often use to explain that so it's clear is we have one or two words to describe snow: heavy snow, light snow. Okay, of course, always using the word snow. The Inuit, or better known to you as the Eskimo, have 26 words. The Russian language does not have the word blue in their language, and hence the color green and blue are indistinguishable. So language creating a reality to navigate through. All right, let's get back to the chapter. So as explained in the group lecture today, we have tension, which is typical for any region of the world, ethnic groups who live around each other, who sometimes overlap into physical geographical territories. That friction could lead towards resentment, and eventually it can even lead to armed conflict. Now, of course, the Mesoamerican perspective of war is not of annihilation. The European one, to an extent, seemed to have been one of genocidal intent within each other, and the minimum take slaves. Here, they transferred that over here, and hence it became somewhat genocidal. But of course, they had some limits because they did need that slave labor eventually. Of course, up in the United States, in the colonization of the eastern coastline, there was the people that are coming. They weren't coming. At first, they might have come with the idea of getting rich quick, but then they found out that there was natives and land, and so since they couldn't find any real substantial amounts of gold or silver, they turned to the land and against the native people. And of course, they had plenty of poor people to bring over to work the land. At first, the Irish, then the Scottish, and eventually it would just be cheaper to bring them out of Africa to work the land. Okay, so we have this tension in Mesoamerica, and of course that works to the benefit of the Spanish, and which allows them to take over the place. Now, Mexico was not a cohesive place like it is today. Well, it's more cohesive now than it was back then. Okay, still there's still tension across the regions depending where you are in Mexico, but it's more cohesive. Back then it wasn't. It was pretty nation states. Some people refuse to call them states, but I think because they were ethnically, culturally different from each other, including in some places the language was different. Of course, large populations and sometimes the need to access their resources. Tlaxcaltecas really mad from an economic perspective. They're mad at the Aztecs because the Aztecs cut off their salt supply. Okay, salt. Besides water, we need salt if you want to have a healthy quality of life, physically speaking. Okay, as an example, Purépechas had access to goods and services out of Central America. Precious stones and feathers being some of those, which they consider of great value. So the Purépechas sometimes would intercept and control those routes, those easier accessible routes to access Central America. Of course, that was bound to cause conflict. So if we look at the world today, we still see kind of an uh, economic issues that eventually rise up to create conflict. In economics, it translates to how each population consumes their resources or begin to go out and extract resources from others. All right. Now, once they take over the place, now it's time to colonize. Um, but colonization is not necessarily just a military and a new population being introduced to a region. It also involves dealing with the oppressed people that you're controlling via force. And this, in order to be to ease the tension, because again, for 400 years, it's not like the natives just sat back and took it. Sometimes there was organized armed rebellions, and there was a couple of close calls. Uh, in one instance, the Mayan country managed to stay free. The Yucatan area kept free from the Spanish dominion for approximately 76 years. So that's part of the reason I think why Mayan country still retains language and culture in comparison to other parts that were gradually being gradually absorbed into the new Spanish order. Out of one of the most successful attempts at colonizing the population was colonizing the Mayan. So you have the upper status native people, and says they had to kind of accept the new order. The Catholic priest, is like, yeah, you got to send your kids to our school now, and so they can learn Spanish and learn our belief system. Of course, those kids would go back and no, they would be suspect of their parents in the old ways, and we can see that to an extent here through our experience. Okay, we come here, we live in the United States, we grew up in the United States. Our parents grew up in Mexico, grew up in Peru, wherever, and they have their ways. But we're growing up here, so we're starting to learn new ways, and we feel like our new ways help us navigate better, including the fact that we pick up the language from very young. So we begin to kind of deviate away from our parents, the way they're thinking. So back then, similar dynamic again, but it was here it happened. In the 21st century or in the last couple of centuries, 2 centuries, it happens as a norm. Over there, it was actually organized, constructed, and imposed. And so it's like, hey, you gotta send your kids. It's like, I don't want to. Yeah, you gotta send your kids. Otherwise, you have to face consequences. Like, okay, all right. And of course, another good example, a contemporary one in the 1800s, was taking tribal kids from the United States region into boarding schools as another way to impose an Anglo-American, Euro-American perspective. Right, and of course, as time unfolds, then other ideological tools are used besides religion. The new economic order also imposes the way labor is being organized, removing whole populations, so destroying the clan, Kalpuli-like system. And so people, you wonder, like, some people ask, I don't know who my tribe is. Well, part of it has to do with displacing people and sending them off to different corners of the territory to exploit, to be exploited, and for wealth to be extracted and transferred back to Spain at the beginning. One of the key words here and during this chapter 3 is syncretism. Syncretism. The Virgen of Guadalupe is a perfect example of syncretism, where you have a brown virgin um, who the native people who are basically now semi-illiterate view as a something they can relate to. But of course, the Virgen of Guadalupe is who represents the mother of Jesus, but the Mexican version of it uh, allows for people to sort of passively begin to accept this new belief system. And of course, I get to see this when I'm as an Aztec dancer. I get to go to church and dance and watch people who come and worship the Virgen during her time period, which is around December. And it's neat how that syncretism has taken place. If you ask most people, they don't really know the history. All they know about Juan Diego, who discovered her, but they don't really understand the colonizing process behind it. All right, the other thing is how there was three powerful groups competing for the labor and the extraction of resources out of Mexican territory. And there's the crown, the nobles, all those people. And then there's the cleric, the Catholic priests who wield power, and eventually also the encomenderos, who are either the sons, relatives, or of the conquistadors, who were given plots of land after they helped conquer the parts of Mexico, and the people who begged the king, hey, I want a piece of the action too. And so those are people that are kind of like your civilian type of people, but they're at the top of, your criollo types who come to the Americas, and they're given large plots of land with native people on it, which also brings up the fact of how come my apellido is Cervantes and why is yours Garcia Rodriguez? A lot of folks believe, well, it has to do with my grandpa and grandma or whatever. Reality is that it got its start with these encomiendas or haciendas. So what happened is that these encomenderos would show up, right? So like, hey, I'm the new owner, and all you native people, you all belong to me, and you're my slaves. You're going to be working, producing wealth for me. And of course, I got to send my taxes out to the king and whoever. So if any of you try to escape, well, what's going to happen is I'm going to tell the other encomendero from the other side of the hill, who is Garcia, that's an Indian, Rodriguez Indian. So the native people got several clans, calpulis, or native people who lived historically in their territories, had to accept a new last name. And a similar situation happened with African Americans, right? How come we have African Americans who don't have African last names? They have African Anglo names, Johnson, Jefferson, because at one point or another, that's who they belong to. So similar dynamic happened with us. Of course, there's exceptions. Some people, obviously, other people immigrated later on after that. Stop at the beginning. Some of the more popular last names has to do. It's connected to that. All right, and the last thing I want to say, he begins to touch a little bit on called what's Nepantlism, or the psychology of colonization. And this is the growing group, which me and you would fit in. Okay, you have the natives on one side with their customs and belief systems, and you got the Spanish trying to impose, creating this overlap in what we call syncretism. Well, that causes the immersion of a new culture in a new way of looking at things, where you're navigating in the Spanish world, at least the Spanish imposed world that they're trying to impose on the native land of Mexico, and then going home and looking at your brown mother, your native mother. And so you're trying to balance those two. Sometimes you'll lean towards the Spanish side because of the language forced on you, and sometimes you'll follow your mother's lead on the usage of the material world, such as the food stuff, the land, including the way you relate to the world. Okay, that's what we call syncretism, cultural syncretism, and also our adoption of belief systems, but with a brown face. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave it at that, and I'll see you all next Tuesday for some of you, and next Thursday for the rest of you. Be waiting for my outline, and be waiting for my this lecture video and the homework. Bye.